Grand castles and stunning cathedrals mark the English landscape. But in a quiet corner of a small country town, down a narrow road among the fields of England, lies an unassuming stone structure. It's a small building, barely 2 stories, with just a well in the front. It has no measurable architectural presence and could hardly be compared to even the least of those monumental cathedrals. But the greatness of the monuments should not be judged by the cut of the stones they are built of, but rather the cut of those that built them. On the border of Gloucestershire and Worcestershire in the English Midlands is a small lane. For decades, the people who drove this lane probably didn't even notice the building beside them. It barely even resembled a building.
It was a ruin. It had walls, but no roof at the time. It just looked like a dilapidated old barn.
It was in bad condition. The roof had been gone for quite a few years, the walls were starting to collapse. The gable ends, they'd all gone in with the weight of the roof over the years, so they were just really caved in. Quite dangerous. The roof had been leaking for a long time, so the water got in, and the lintels above the windows were rotten. So it was very dangerous, and then the trees were growing through it. And here, you couldn't get around here because it was just so overgrown. So it really was quite a poor, sad state.
The Gadfield Elm Chapel was abandoned by its original owners, and it fell into disrepair. What was once a sacred meeting place for worship soon became nothing more than a house for animals.
Members then disappeared, so it soon became a barn.
The members did just disappear. The building would be claimed by locals and changed to accommodate their needs.
So the wall, they knocked the wall out. So on the roadside over there, they'd knocked it out. So in the earlier pictures, you can see the big door that they'd used to put the old implements in.
But it wasn't always a barn. Much like Gadfield Elm had provided shelter and peace to the church members who used it originally, we know that others throughout the years also took refuge within its humble walls.
Then we do know that it was a German prisoner of war that stayed here after the war. He lived at the end of it in the little upstairs and downstairs. And in fact, his wife had a child here. So it's used as a bit of a family home for a little while. Just empty, just falling apart.
During the years that it lay empty, the chapel was forgotten about by most. But some still knew the history of the broken building by the road.
The thing about the 18th century was that during the 18th century, the Church of England had a monopoly on faith and practice in this country. The Anglican Church was established by law, and really non-Anglican worship was very much not part of the general picture.
Not everyone was happy with the way the Church of England held that monopoly and how it operated.
So with the great national zeal for reform came a collateral desire to reform the church.
One man who wanted this church reform was John Wesley. Wesley was a minister for the Church of England, but over the years, he had grown tired of what he called the dead formality of the church.
The Church of England was moving away from the pure gospel as it had been taught. The Church of England wasn't interested in his feelings.
In the mid-1700s, he formed a group at the University of Oxford with his brother Charles. They and their club members set out to do good. They frequently visited the poor and those in prison. Their fellow classmates mocked them, calling them Methodists for their methods of following the church.
By rule they eat, by rule they drink, do all things else by rule but think. Accuse their priests of loose behaviour to get more in the layman's favour. Method alone must guide 'em all, whence Methodists themselves they call.
John Wesley never officially formed a separate Methodist religion, but after his death in 1791, the followers of Methodism did divide themselves from the Church of England. Less than a century later, another preacher, Thomas Kington, would follow Wesley's example.
We know that sometime around after 1832 that he left and formed this group called the United Brethren, again trying to get back to a purer form of the religion.
Though they called themselves the United Brethren, they had a large number of female congregants. They followed closely the original teachings of John Wesley. As the religious climate in England changed, the United Brethren grew.
That early part of the 19th century is the beginning of a general growth of church-going. And you see people taking a great interest in religious affairs.
Many people took great interest in Kington's organization.
We see other denominations beginning to grow. What we call dissenters become much more prosperous and numerous in this period.
Within a few years, there were over 600 people in the congregation. They could no longer fit in the homes they had been meeting in.
They had this chapel built in 1836, so they obviously had a reasonably large congregation.
They met in their chapel often, preaching to one another and others, but they always felt something was missing.
Two of their lay preachers that we do have documented in which they were talking to one another after having preached. And they said, "I've preached all I know. I wish there was further light and knowledge. I wish further light and knowledge would come." They were in a state of, if you like, preparation to hear the word.
They did not know how long they would have to wait. But while they met in their new chapel in England, across the ocean in America, the Lord was restoring His gospel and preparing His servants to go take the truth to the world. Joseph Smith was the prophet of a new and small church called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The church was not even a decade old, and already its members had trekked from New York to Ohio to Missouri. Now they were being forced from that state by a militia with orders to exterminate them. With Joseph still in jail and snow still covering the ground, the Saints left Missouri and walked to Illinois.
Of course, things were very disruptive in the whole church. We didn't quite know where we were going.
As summer came, so did the mosquitoes and disease. The Saints lived in tents and makeshift homes while they tried to build a city out of the swamp they were in. There was little protection from the illness that seemed to affect most of the settlers.
We have some terrible sickness taking place in that area, in Nauvoo and Montrose.
This year, for the first time since the church was organized, their membership decreased instead of grew. Death and apostasy claimed many members.
Because of this apostasy, we were losing, there was a lot of people who became disaffected from the church because of all these things going on in Kirtland that they saw as being disingenuous to Mormonism or to Joseph Smith's ministry.
This all weighed heavily on Joseph's mind. Even he, the most faithful, had begun to doubt. While confined in Liberty Jail, he wrote a prayer asking, "O God, where art thou?" As part of his response, the Lord reminded Joseph of his loyal friends. The revelation is now recorded in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 121, verse 9. Thy friends do stand by thee, and they shall hail thee again. Joseph's faith was great, as was his sacrifice when the Lord asked him to send Wilford Woodruff and 8 other members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles on missions abroad. These men were his most fervent supporters and his close friends. Now they would all be leaving him.
I spent the day in preparing to leave home to go on my long mission to England. I make a sacrifice of my all for Christ's sake to do his work. It is no small trial of faith to leave my family without money and with the power of disease resting upon me. but yet I do this freely for Christ's sake, trusting in him.
Woodruff had 2 months to prepare for his departure, and on August 8th, though still very ill, he set off with John Taylor for England.
The tough things about this situation is their call to actually leave was very untimely. He's not feeling well. He's been they call it the ague, it's the shakes and the fevers.
The absence of his friends would be a tremendous sacrifice to the prophet Joseph Smith. But Elder Woodruff made his own sacrifices for his mission. He left behind his wife Phoebe, who was pregnant and ill with malaria, and he saw his daughter Sarah Emma for the last time. She died while her father was in England.
That's got to really tear his heart when he receives that word in England that she had passed away.
My dear Wilford, what will be your feelings when I tell you that yesterday I was called to witness the departure of our little Sarah Emma from this world? She was too lovely, too kind, and too affectionate to live in this wicked world. I thought I could not live without her, especially in the absence of my companion. But she has gone. The Lord hath taken her home to himself for some wise purpose. I can see and feel that he has taken her home and will take better care of her than I possibly could for a little while until I shall go and meet her.
Early on this important morning, I took my departure from the embraces of my companion to go on my mission. Phoebe, farewell. Be of good cheer. Remember me in your prayers.
Woodruff and his 2 travel companions had a long way to go. They traveled from Illinois to New York. Much of that time, they were still sick and walked most of the way.
So this will be the longest journey of Wilford Woodruff's life. This is halfway around the world for them. And again, it's slow travel. They've got to get money. They've got to get some means to even get there. And they don't have much. So they're going to rely on many saints and other people to help them in their journey. And so it's going to be 4 months. They're going to be traveling for 4 months to New York City, where they're going to embark on the ship there.
The group sailed for England on December 19th, and on January 11th, they spotted land.
The city of Liverpool was soon in sight, and an English steamboat soon came along and towed us into port, or the dock in Liverpool.
Though Gadfield Elm had fallen apart, its memory lived on. Even though the building was unkept and empty, people sometimes went there for reflection. One of those people was Randall Hall, a visitor from America. He penned this poem.
Tucked obscurely in the corner of some farmer's field, the small stone chapel dwindles with no apparent honor. The walls are crumbling, slowly flooded by a rising tide of slender weeds. The gray slate roof lies slumped upon the floor in uncontested disarray. It is a pale, unlikely sanctuary for the word of God. That spoken word once transformed itself into the air our forebears breathed, the blood that even after several generations pulses quick in recognition of the mildest echo still abiding here, a gently simmering catalyst inviting us to witness and to praise.
We had a ward activity one Easter Monday, and we came by here and we did the sites. And so from that early age on, I gained an appreciation for our church history. One of our trustees was a gentleman by the name of Ben Bloxham, and he spent a lot of time here during the 70s and 80s doing a lot of research as well. And in the 80s, every time he came here, he'd come to church and I'd see him and he'd tell us something new that he'd found and he'd show us. And you know, my fascination was just kind of growing and growing. And so by the time the early 90s came, when it came up for sale, it was just, well, we've got to do something.
The land that Gadfield Elm sat on, and more importantly, the building itself, came up for sale in 1994.
I'd been abroad for a year working. I'd only just come back into the country, and a friend of mine had seen that it was advertised in the local newspaper. And this was like a couple of weeks before the sale.
Other members in the area had been asking around to see if the church was going to purchase it.
And word came back that they weren't. So it was kind of like, well, surely we have to do something.
If the members didn't want the chapel to be dismantled and used as farmland, they would have to step up. Gardner spoke to some other people interested in the chapel, and they formed the Gadfield Elm Trust. Their first order of business, winning the auction.
The first thing we had to do was obviously put our hands in our own pockets to get some money together to buy it. So we thought there could be some property developers at auction wanting to get it, prepared to spend a lot of money, which we didn't have. So I think we managed to scrape together probably about £5,000 or £6,000 between us. I spoke to the planning officer. Nobody was here to speculate or to buy it with a view to developing it. So that was the first big hurdle we got over.
But what exactly were they buying? It wasn't just Gadfield Elm that was for sale. It was 11 acres of pasture land and one derelict former dwelling.
Went and spoke to the local farmer, cut a deal with him where if we got it, he'd buy the land straight off us.
With the Gadfield Elm Trust formed and a plan to buy the land in place, they went to auction.
Yeah, when auctions come up here, yeah, they usually get a hotel room or a pub room and all the locals like to go. It's an opportunity to get together and see what's happening. We went into the room, of course it's packed, it's only a small pub, packed, lots of people in there. And I was there with two of our trustees, my father and some of my children. The farmer that was going to buy it back, he was there in the room as well. The rest were strangers, locals didn't really know. And I was the one that's going to be doing the bidding, which is quite exciting. And so the bidding starts, moves up, slows, and it kind of accelerates off again, the bidding, and so I go with the bidding again, and it's kind of working its way up. Then it slows, and the hammer went down. And of course, my trustees had no idea whether we got it or not. So there's a little bit of anxiety amongst them there for a little while. We got it, we got it.
But they did get it. And suddenly, they had a historical, albeit derelict, chapel on their hands.
So it was an absolutely transformative period in the history of this country, where we essentially turned from an agricultural economy to an urban industrial economy.
The next 7 years were hard. This was the period of time when England was exploiting child labour. Samuel was only 7 and John 9, but they worked in a brickyard. I would help the little fellows across the narrow, dangerous bridge to go to work at daylight, and at night I would meet them and help them home.
Clearly they were difficult times for people in this country, as they were, well, around the world really.
It's very important to remember that the infant mortality rate remains very high and that life expectancy remains generally low.
The country was suffering, its people dying. Wilford Woodruff, who had just come himself from horrible conditions in Illinois, even noted the suffering in his journal.
It gave me pain while passing through the streets of London this cold day to see poor women, and especially little children, freezing nearly to death without food, fire, and but little clothing, but begging for a morsel to eat.
England in this area in 1840, when Wilford Woodruff visited, was very rural, this part here, and most of the people that were members of the United Brethren were farm labourers. Basically, the area was quite poor.
When Woodruff landed in Liverpool in 1840, the United Brethren had been meeting in their Gadfield Elm Chapel for 4 years. They continued to have faith that their prayers for more knowledge would be answered, and they would. From Liverpool, Woodruff went to the Potteries in Staffordshire. The Potteries were a collection of 6 small towns. These towns were a hub for ceramic production. During his preaching in the Potteries, Woodruff received a prompting to go south.
Wilford Woodruff wasn't in the Potteries for too long because on that Sunday of March 1st, he had this very strong spiritual prompting, I guess, that he was to leave the area and move south.
While he had been teaching in the north, he met a man named William Benbow, whose brother John owned a farm down south. William offered to be a guide and take Woodruff there. They made the long journey just 1 day later.
He'd been there for 6 weeks, so it wasn't like he just arrived and was taking off immediately, but he felt very much that there was a greater work to do elsewhere.
We took coach, rode through Dudley, Starbridge, Kidderminster, Starport, and Worcester, then walked to Mr. John Benbow's hill farm. Mr. John Benbow was a large farmer, and I spoke the word of God unto him in his house, and he received my testimony, and we had a good time.
They spoke it well into the night as he preached the gospel to John and Jane Benbow.
Woodruff spent part of the week clearing out the pond at the Benbow farm. In it, he baptized John and Jane, as well as many others.
I had the testimony that there were many present that would be saints.
His testimony would prove to be revelatory.
Brother Woodruff baptized Mrs. Hill, Hannah Simmons, and myself at midnight in the pond in the centre of the village.
The Lord had sent Wilford Woodruff to the members of the United Brethren. They were ready for him. He began teaching immediately and had success on his first day.
I preached at John Benbow's hill farm at Froms Hill, at Stanley Hill, Brother John Benbow's.
In less than a week, Woodruff had baptized 32 people. 13 of those were registered ministers of the United Brethren.
He preached on the Thursday, several more people, and on that Sunday, he preached to over 1,000 people at 3 different sermons.
He continued to spend his days preaching, and 2 weeks after arriving, he baptized Thomas Kington, the leader of the United Brethren.
We had only to hear him once, and William and I knew with all our hearts that he was offering us a priceless treasure.
Their joy in the gospel, which they spread. It wasn't just the United Brethren, they told their neighbours.
He was absolutely exhilarated at what was going on. I mean, he said these people were prepared, and here they brought this gospel message, and to just, I mean, nowhere else in Britain or Europe, to my knowledge, did something like this happen where there were a people who were so ready and were waiting for this gospel message.
But that didn't mean it was without its hardships.
It wasn't all easy.
Though he did have some bad times, there was a lot of, dissension among the other people around the area, and he got a lot of criticism and people. He actually had a case where he was stoned, and there was another case where they threw a dog into the pond and said, "Baptize the dog," and things like that. So it wasn't easy for him.
One of Woodruff's favorite things to do while he was in the area was to climb the Malvern Hills. Frequently in his journals, he recorded his experiences on the hills.
During this day's walk, I had a grand survey of the works of nature and the power of God while standing upon the top of Malvern Hill. I had a view of all the surrounding country for many miles with a fine, beautiful cultivated vale upon every hand. After having my mind prepared for a walk in meditation, I commenced ascending this noted hill. These hills were covered with grass, which is grazed by sheep. I soon drew my thoughts to solemn reflections. O Malvern, thy lofty hill bears up my feet, while mine eyes take a survey of thy deep entrenchments. O Malvern, thou hast been the refuge for thousands in time of trouble or war. Yet Wilford is the only solitary soul that treads thy soil this day, and he alone bends his knee upon the height of thy summer, in the midst of clouds, to offer up the gratitude of his heart.
Woodruff had much to be grateful for. During this time, many people were baptized.
Wilford Woodruff had tremendous success in that area.
He realized the blessings of that success. On May 18th, he recorded an experience about the conversion of the United Brethren.
Elder Thomas Kington made a feast, which had been a custom among the United Brethren. But as they now were all receiving the fullness of the gospel, they had become saints. Elder Willard Richards remarked that he did not believe that there had ever been such a company of saints prepared in so short a time, and I truly felt grateful to my Heavenly Father for his mercy. I reflected back upon the time only 2 months and a half since when I first proclaimed the fullness of the gospel in this region and began to baptize such as received my testimony. And now there is nearly 400 souls standing in the new and everlasting covenant, and the prosperity of the work constantly increasing.
It was his teaching in this area that first brought Woodruff into contact with the Gadfield Elm Chapel.
Walked to Gadfield Elm and preached in the chapel to a large congregation.
By June, the United Brethren were almost all converted to the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. At a conference held at the chapel, that proposed to be rededicated in the name of their new religion.
Offered the following resolution to wit, that this be no more called the quarter day of the Gadfield Elm Circuit of the United Brethren, but the Gadfield Elm Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
First thing then is, well, what do we do with it? We've just about managed to buy the building. It's now dangerous. Can we make it secure and safe? So we managed to do that with a few of the pennies and pounds we had left over. And then it was, well, how do we go about restoring it?
After the Gadfield Elm Trust bought the building, that was the question on everyone's mind. None of them had serious construction backgrounds.
So it was a real education for us locally.
But with some help, they managed to get to work.
The members were great. They really got behind the project. A lot of service projects. We had a lot of people making donations here and helping with different things.
They also got help from above.
I think we had quite a bit of faith. We'd always seen that there'd been some divine intervention along the way and just figured that the Lord would provide.
And he did.
And the year that we were just wondering how were we going to kind of get to the next stage, one of our trustees, he had this big payout. And he came and he said, Wayne, I wasn't expecting this, it's come from nowhere. And it actually worked out being about a half of what the whole project cost was. And he said, you know, let's use it all. And I said, are you sure? A lot of money. And he said, no, I want to do it. And then of course when we have those experiences, when you feel the Spirit guiding you towards people, we had one, and he came to me and he said, it's our 40th wedding anniversary, we don't have a lot of money, and instead of splashing out our anniversary, we thought we'd like to donate the money we had, £1 for each year, to the trust. So that was very touching. Get to see people making a real difference just through that little bit of sacrifice and stuff like that.
Others waited for things like a new car and gave up stocks in their businesses to help the chapel be completed. Of course, there were still the times where they didn't know what they would do.
Some of the emotions are that of anxiety when you think, oh, how are we going to actually get this moving, or you think you're hitting a bit of a brick wall, or you're not getting the support you want. I think for us, all of us, it was a great example of how just to have a little bit of faith, just stick with it, just keep, like those pioneers, just keep moving in the right direction and you'll get to your promised valley.
The Gadfield Elm Trust did all they could to keep the restoration as accurate as possible to the original chapel.
It was quite a basic building. Unfortunately, we had a couple of builders in the church who had a bit of spare time on their hands. They were between contracts and they came up and did the stonework. And then another one did the roof for us. But for the pews, we went to Wales to get some out of an old church that had closed. So we'd like to think that we've kept a lot of how it would have been, but we've given it a little bit of a facelift.
The same Gadfield Elm Chapel, with a few minor upgrades. All but one member of the United Brethren converted. Woodruff also taught many others, and during his mission, recorded almost 2,000 baptisms. But the church in America was still in turmoil. They needed the strength of the English members.
This will be the last time that I break bread unto many of these saints, as they are about to immigrate and gather with the saints. A company of about 50 is about to start for America, about 40 of which will go by the free charity and philanthropy of Elder John Benbow.
The church over here wanted people to emigrate to strengthen the church here, and they were in Nauvoo at this time, and so there was this push for emigration.
And they would always ask the question, why did they ever leave? And we kept saying, well, a prophet told them to go, so that was it, you know, end of story.
They were obedient to a missionary who was an apostle, and the call of a prophet who lived thousands of miles away, and were willing to give up this beautiful land, go to Liverpool or Bristol, get on a ship and have a horrendous journey.
But as we look back at the steps they took, many of those would have left families that they knew they wouldn't see again. Some of them had to sneak away because their families didn't want them to go. So they're responding to the call.
This was a very trying time for me. Every day I had to take leave of some dear friend that I never expected to see again in this world.
Leaving behind all they knew was not easy. Many saints wanted to go to Nauvoo, but poverty and other circumstances kept them in England. As Woodruff said goodbye to the saints, they tearfully pleaded with him for answers and relief.
It is the last conference I shall ever attend at the Gadfield Elm Chapel.
I know that my Redeemer lives. What comfort this sweet sentence gives. He lives who once was dead. He lives forever living there. He lives my hungry soul to feed. He lives to bless in time of need.
After conference closed, a scene followed which is not easily described. For the saints are anxious to gather with the saints in Nauvoo as soon as possible, but many are very poor and see no door open as yet, and some are placed in all the perplexing circumstances that possible can be, and are flocking around me by scores at a time, asking counsel what to do. As soon as the meeting closed, multitudes crowded around me. Many hands were presented on every side to bid me farewell, many calling for me to bless them before I leave them, others crying out to lay hands on me and heal me before you go. Brother Woodruff, I am turned out of doors for my religion. What shall I do? I am all ready to go to Zion. My wife won't go with me. Shall I go and leave her? My husband beats me and turns me out of doors because I have been baptized. I've got money enough to carry me and the children to Zion. Will you let me go without him? Brother Woodruff, one word with you. My mother is over 80 years of age and has willed me 60 pounds. I want to go with the saints. Must I stay for her to die, or may I go and leave her? Brother Woodruff, I have sold my little place, but must go out of the house into the street. This will not quite carry my family to America. Can you help me to a few pounds or tell me what to do? Brother Woodruff, can't you come and preach to us in Cheltenham? Won't you go home and take some tea with me? My head is in great pain. Won't you heal me? I want you to consecrate these bottles of oil before you go. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. God bless you, Brother Woodruff. These and 1,000 other questions were asked me in the term of an hour or more, and I needed as much wisdom as Solomon to be a counselor in the midst of such a scene. When I left the chapel, many were still waiting for a little counsel upon a variety of subjects which they did not get for the want of time. Many parted with me with tears in their eyes.
My favourite member is Anne Rowley. She and William joined the church, but William, he had died. So at 48, she took 6 of her children, 1 of her stepchildren, and made that horrendous journey.
The little band of believers gathered together. With no money or guarantee of safety, they left behind the chapel they loved and had built. They left behind their homes. They left behind a legacy.
Oh, the grief and sorrow of this time I can never forget. I left all that was near and dear to me to travel some 1,000 miles alone and cast my lot with the people of God. We hired teams to take us to Gloucester, and some of us started to walk a little way. When we came to the place where we would lose sight of Father's house, I sat down, and I might have stayed there if some of the company had not come back for me. I was sick and quite overcome with the grief and sorrow I had passed through in the last 3 months. On seeing the church, I thought of the girl I was not 6 months ago. Now I had left all and was travelling alone to a land unknown to me. But I had cast my lot with the people of God, and in Him I put my trust.
You can feel the spirit of Gadfield Elm, I said, because it has a distinct spirit.
Though the original members of the Gadfield Elm Chapel have long since left, crossed the ocean and the American plains. The spirit that they felt when they were here is as strong today as ever.
Not being romantic here, or there's no one going to pop out the woodwork. I'm not going to get visions or anything, I said, but there's definitely a spirit of well-being here, a spirit of happiness, that the people who left here, although they suffered great trauma in going all the way to the Salt Lake Valley, they enjoyed it. They did something they knew that was right. You cannot possibly miss that spirit.
I've always felt the spirit in the place. This building is just bricks and mortar. The spirit of the place is the actual people that joined the church, were baptised by Wilfred Woodruff or Brigham Young in this area.
Because I was part of the Gadfield Elm Trust when we put it together. And you know, when you see what it used to look like, when it's just a pile of stones down here, and then we built it to that, then I was party to the spirit as it came along. It's just so special.
On a sunny day, it's a beautiful, quiet, peaceful place where you can sit and enjoy the atmosphere. But even in the winter, when it's pouring down a rain and you're inside, you can still feel the spirit here. But it is the place it is. It's the big field that you can see, and the people who visit. It's everything. It's a whole package, really. The chapel, the field, the upstairs rooms, the trees, just the area itself. It's just such a wonderful place to come.
And I'm looking around this gorgeous scenery, and I'm thinking they left this amazingly beautiful countryside. They may have had economic challenges, but they had no idea what challenges were to come for them. And I could feel their presence.
The members of the Gadfield Elm Trust followed in the spirit of those brave, faithful saints. And in 2004, 164 years after the Gadfield Elm Chapel was originally given to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it was returned. At the dedication of the chapel, President Hinckley said, "I don't know the consequences of the numbers who were baptized, who are members of the church today, but they must number in the thousands as a result of the harvest that occurred here at the Benbow Farm and in this general area. How grateful we are for the faith of these men, the faith to leave their homes, the faith to travel to this distant land, the faith to dedicate themselves without any reluctance of any kind to the work. They worked night and day, unending, in carrying forward and building the kingdom on this part of the earth. It was the effort that was made here that in reality saved the church." In a quiet corner of a small country town, down a narrow road among the fields of England, lies an unassuming stone structure, the quiet embodiment of great sacrifice.